Thank you everyone for arranging to be here this afternoon. We have a special presentation by Dr. Christina Hubbard, who serves as the Senior Director of Research Advisory Services at EAB. As many of you know, EAB is a national leader committed to transformative change in higher education and is a valued partner of Passaic County Community College. We've had a membership now for many years and have really benefited from that, and we're looking forward to having you benefit from those resources as well. So Dr. Hubbard has had an extraordinary career in higher education. She's been with EAB since 2017. Prior to that, worked in various student success capacities at Northern Virginia Community College, and she also possesses expertise in all aspects of student success, particularly related to adult and post-traditional learners. This summer, Dr. Rose and I had an opportunity to attend the EAB Community College Roundtable, where Dr. Hubbard and her colleagues shared their research and their insights around topics related to college leadership, retention and student success, and also enrollment. And as we work to strengthen our grant-funded programs, EAB has a wealth of knowledge and resources to be able to support our efforts. So we really view EAB as kind of a partner in our grants implementation, and our goal is to make sure that the college is able to take full advantage of all the resources that they have to offer. So if you would please join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Hubbard.
All right, so we're going to mic up for this one. So I'm going to warn you, I'm going to try not to be too loud. It doesn't want to let it go. There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction, Todd. I really do appreciate it, and I love working with your team here. A little bit of context around today's presentation. So number one, I'll take you through kind of a high-level overview of what we're going to be covering across the next couple of hours. But one of the things that I would really love for each of you to be thinking about is if I share a practice, if I share an insight, and you're like, oh, we're already doing that, and it's actually working well in this way, or we tried that, and it's not working, and this is why. Let's have that conversation. It is going to be a very boring 2 hours if I am the only one talking during today's presentation. So please stop me, interrupt. Is that you showing that you have caffeine? You're like, we'll make it. I got this. But with that, let me go ahead and go through sort of my proposed agenda for our time together. And like I said, I would love to have you all, if we don't make it to the last slide, that's a success in my book, because it means that you engaged with the content that we had here. One thing that we are trying to do is to set some time aside at the very end for a broad Q&A. This doesn't have to be related to content that you see here. It could be some kind of a question that you've been struggling with in your own work. It can be a question about trends that are happening in higher education. Anything related to community colleges, I would love to engage in that conversation. If I can't get you an answer today, I can take those questions away with me and send you a response and follow-up. We have a whole team of experts that dives into various different practices that are happening nationwide, and we're always excited to share those back with each of you. So across the next couple of hours, we're going to kick things off by talking about enrollment, everybody's favorite topic, because it's quite the roller coaster in the community college space. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that. What are some of the key variables that are affecting enrollment, and what can we do about it? Then we're going to shift gears and talk more specifically about different student populations who engage with community colleges. In particular, those who are completely opting out of higher education and what we might say to try to entice those students to enroll with us. And then our post-traditional learners, again, looking at those adult learners or students with adult-like characteristics. They might be 17, 18, 19 years old, but if they're a parenting student, they are absolutely very much like an adult learner. Then we're going to do a deep dive into a variety of different practices that really will support the typical student populations that enroll in community colleges. This is where I expect a lot of conversation, pushing, feedback, where we can start to think through what might be a good fit for you and your teams here at Passaic. And then if we have time, I have a section at the very end on the ROI of student success. it's kind of a misnomer. The idea and the reason that I wanted to include it in this presentation is because I led a lot of grant-funded programs when I was over at Northern Virginia Community College. And I know one of the biggest challenges is trying to figure out how you make a grant effort sustainable on the college after the grant dollars disappear. And so that's the idea behind that ROI in student success. Does that seem like a fair agenda? All right, any questions before we kick things off? All right. So as Todd mentioned, EAB is an education, technology, and research firm based out of Washington, D.C. You all have a research partnership with us where we are able to provide insights and best practices from a variety of community colleges from around the country. And what we like to say to folks is that we hope to be your first resource. I remember sitting in your seats. I remember Googling all of the questions I had. I remember thinking through what is a reasonable metric that we might be able to reach with X effort on our campuses. Let EAB be the first stop for you to try to fast track some of those answers for you and give you a sense of what others are doing in that space already so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The other push I would make as grant leaders in the college, one of the things that I used to run into quite a bit in my own program is that there would be dollars out there. And so it would be really tempting to go and complete that grant application. But what that did sometimes was it kind of stretched my team really thin as we started to try to answer different RFPs to be able to secure more funding to help more students, but it changed sort of the focus of the program that I was leading. So again, if you ever need a thought partner on trying to figure out whether a grant actually makes sense to go after, feel free to pick up the phone and let's see if we can get some time together to be able to have that conversation. Todd already did a great job introducing me. The only other thing that I would add again is just having worked at Northern Virginia Community College, the program that I led focused on adult learners. Our goal was to try to give every adult learner in our program, mind you, they were not all adult learners, or they were not all of the adult learners at Nova. That's a huge, huge sum, and we only were able to serve about 1,000 of those students in our program. But it ended up leading to my dissertation research, where I really wanted to dig into why the students in our holistic advising program were more successful than the average adult learner at Nova. Again, like many of you, we knew that we had something that was working and we really needed to better understand those insights and then be able to share those out with far more audiences. So that's really what led to that work and was all based on a grant-funded program. After I defended my dissertation research, as so many of us do, I wanted to give that research longer legs, and so I went to EAB because I knew then I would be able to influence and support students from around the country instead of just students at one individual college. I am not the only one over at EAB doing work for community colleges. These are your strategic leaders for Passaic County Community College. Kabibi Bonner has been working with EAB for a really long time. She's kind of this senior strategic leader. She's the one that really helps institutions figure out sort of what resources and strategies might be most effective and how we can build a deeper relationship with an individual college. The person you'd most likely be engaging with most is Joseph. He's down there on the bottom. He is kind of the concierge of resources, if you will. So he's the one that we reach out to a lot of the time, pulling together some of the slides that I was pulling together today. I'm like, Joseph, can you go find X? And then he goes and scores the world and comes back with that information. But I wanted to be sure to include their contact information on here for all of you, because I think one of the most important pushes for today's conversation is to use these resources. You all already paid for it. And everything that I'm going to be sharing with you, everything that I discuss, it's an included service, it's an included resource for all of you. So definitely consider that a first stop. All right, into our research. So we're going to kick things off with a nice rosy slide talking about community college enrollment. This slide goes all the way back to 2016, but I'll be honest with you, we could have gone all the way back to 2010 and that trend line looks the same. We have been losing enrollment in community colleges nationwide since the Great Recession. Now we know why that is. We know that back then, we had a lot more adult learners enrolled in community colleges, and then as the labor market started to get a little bit stronger, they left higher education, and that started this trajectory. The concern, though, is that these numbers are accelerating, and we know that during the pandemic we saw a massive outgoing of students. What's interesting here is that it was kind of a 50-50 split between students we lost to retention issues versus students who would have enrolled and never actually enrolled with us. We're going to talk about some of the challenges related to this in just a moment and where some of these students might be going to kind of rethink how we might be able to re-engage these students and get them enrolled here. But first, a pop quiz for all of you. So when you think about the community college enrollment decline across the past, let's say 10 years, do you think that the #1 reason is related to the demographic decline? And when I say demographic decline, what I mean is that we have far fewer 18-year-olds than we did even just a few years ago. That's not something that's going to change. People are just simply having fewer kids than they had in the past. The second issue would be college-going rates. Even though we have kids that are reaching the age of 18, they're not necessarily choosing to go to college. They're just saying, you know what, college isn't for me. We know skepticism about higher education is at an all-time high. So is it the college-going rates? Or the final option there is market share. So our community college, or students that would have gone to a community college just opting to go to Rutgers or other four-year institutions in the area. So how many folks think that the biggest contributor to enrollment declines for community colleges come from demographic decline? Impressive. Okay. Okay, I see some tentative hands. All right. College going rates. All right. And how about market share? All right, fantastic. So what I will tell you, and this does vary by individual institutions, but overall, I said it was a little more lead up than I meant with this clicker not working. The big answer is market share. All the way over on the right-hand side there, 60% of enrollment changes are explained by market share, 60%. A couple other data points here that I'm going to share with you. As I mentioned before, we have already started to see the demographic decline that will continue on between 2025 and 2030. We'll see about another 12% shortfall. That varies by area. I can't remember right now. Steve probably
We're
knows.
in good shape.
You're in good shape. Because everybody loves New Jersey, so I guess you guys are in good shape there. College going rates, 32% of 18 to 24-year-olds are simply saying that college is not for them, and they're just opting out. So that's going to continue to hurt our numbers. Across the next few slides, I'm actually going to take you through each of these and just kind of give you a little bit more explanation about what we mean about this data. So first we have our demographic declines. So what this map tells you is how much, and yes, this is one of those areas where we can see New Jersey is not hurting as much as some of your friends to the north. This is how birth rates have changed across the United States and how this is going to be affecting our enrollment. So the lighter the color, the more favorable the outcome there. The darker it is, the more concerning the demographic cliff is in those areas. So again, in New Jersey, we're looking at about a 10 to 20% decline between 2025 and 2035. Up in my area in New England, it's not pretty. And what we're seeing up there is that the state is literally just handing out funds, like trying to get every 18-year-old to enroll in college because their populations are declining, and there's a lot of favorable outcomes that come along with people who have completed higher education. So they're trying to really incentivize that. Many times at EAB we'll make a running joke. This is not an indication that you should go chase down people in Iowa and Utah. Those populations were already ridiculously small, so that tiny little bump that each of those states are seeing is not really going to help any of us solve our enrollment challenges. The other point that I want to make when we talk about the demographic cliff, this kind of touches on that market share component, and we'll dive more deeply into that in just a moment. But what we're seeing is the more open access your institution, like, I don't know, community colleges, the more you are going to be affected by this demographic cliff. And we understand why this happens, right? So if you are a highly selective institution and there are fewer students in your applicant pool, you just dig a little bit deeper. What's really concerning right now is not only are they digging deeper, they're taking more of the students than they ever would have in the past. So their enrollment is actually going up while the rest of us are really struggling. Anybody who, now would have gone to an so then the R1 institutions start to dig into the R2 pool, the R2 pool starts to dig into the community college pool, and that's why we get the brunt of the demographic cliff the most. Then we get into the college going rates. So what you're seeing in this graphic, in the teal along the top, what we can see here is going back to 2010, high school graduation rates actually continued to increase. That's really great news. We're getting more students who are completing a high school diploma. That's wonderful. The problem is, along this same time, far fewer of them were opting to enroll in college. We can see that before the pandemic, there was already a 2.3% decrease in the number of students that were going to college. And then after the pandemic, or going into later stages of the pandemic, we kind of saw a free fall where people were just opting out of higher education altogether. From EAB's perspective, this is not something that's going to change anytime soon. And you see some data points that support that over on the right-hand side. We have had about twice as many students who are chronically absent in K-12. That means that they are not academically as prepared to enroll in college. They're probably not feeling as confident, and frankly, they're not as comfortable or familiar with an educational environment because they've been opting out for a while now. We also know that national standards are showing some pretty concerning trends in terms of academic performance. And one of the things that we've been hearing from a lot of college leaders is that a lot of the students that are coming in don't know it. So the kids that were earning A's and B's when they are going through their later years of high school, they're still earning A's and B's. All that the K-12 system did was sort of shift what that A and B meant, rather than actually changing the grades. So the students don't realize that they're behind until they hit our classrooms. And that's when they get the reality check that the faculty members are shocked that the student doesn't know requisite information. And the student is like, but I was an A student, how am I struggling now that I'm in college? When we think about some of the academic delays that are happening for students, it goes all the way through the K-12 system, and one of the concerns that we have is that regardless, that if national or if historic trends persist, one of the things that we know is that we're going to see a continued shortfall in college enrollment, because if a student is behind in reading in third grade, those of you that have been looking at this for a while, I see some heads nodding over there. If you're behind in third grade, that's when your brain shifts from learning to read to reading to learn. So if you're behind them, there's only a 25% chance that you're ever going to catch up to grade level. Again, if they're behind and they're not able to perform at grade level, only about 50% of those kids will ever enroll in college. I promise this gets more uplifting soon. Not here, but soon. Okay, so when we start to think about market share, I actually had to push on a number of my colleagues over at EAB saying, I need something to tell this story about market share. So this is what we got, folks. So I'm going to take you through this slide in just a moment. Every dot on here represents market share, okay? So if you look at the blues and the oranges, that's market share back in 2012. Okay, so this kind of gives you a sense of how college enrollment looked back in 2012. The key takeaway here, though, is that you can see up in the very top of the two-year colleges column, the orange dots there are market share that we lost in our sector. And what you can see is in the teal, that's where that market share went. Does that make sense? I know this is a really complicated slide, but this is to kind of show you that students who were previously enrolled in two-year colleges and for-profit colleges, they have resoundingly gone over to private institution, four-year collectively. And then when we think about the change in market share, you can see again, we've lost about 8% of our enrollment through 2019. It's higher now. The R1s have picked up about 29% of the market share. All of this is happening while people are becoming increasingly skeptical of the value of higher education. So Gallup does a poll every couple of years, and one of the things that they ask is, what is your confidence in higher education? And of the tens of thousands of people that they surveyed here, you can see that back in 2015, close to 2/3 of Americans said that they had confidence in higher education and what we were doing. This year it was at an all-time low. 36% of Americans have confidence in what higher education is able to contribute to our society. So when we think about those college going rates, we think about the demographic cliff that is here, we think about the market share issues that we're running into, this is what we need to be running against. We need to be pushing back against that public skepticism and trying to figure out how we can actually prove that we are the right choice for people who are interested in going to college. Now, when we think about those individuals who are opting out of higher education, one of the key points that I like to make is that about 2/3 of them, there's still a good chance that we can engage them and show them that we can help them to reach their goals. And that's what you see called out here. There's about 5.8 million 18 to 24-year-olds who aren't enrolling for one reason or another. About 38% of them say that they plan to enroll at some point in the future, and 32% of them are still a little bit undecided. It's only 30% who have said, no way, no how, I have no plans ever to go to college. But when those folks are surveyed, the slide's coming. There's a survey that I'm going to be able to share with you in just a minute on why these folks are choosing not to. But some of the qualitative feedback is over there on the right. College is too expensive. I don't know what I'd study. There's the continued uncertainty as people kind of reevaluate what their lives look like after the pandemic. Working, obviously, we know that students who fall into the lowest income bracket, people who have fallen into the lowest income bracket have actually seen their wages surge significantly more than any other financial demographic in the US. So again, the appeal of employment right now is pretty high, and there's sort of that, we all know it's a short-term fix. We all know that $17, $18, $19 working in fast food, retail, hospitality, etc. might feel really good right now when you're 18, 19, or 20 years old. But that's not going to provide for a family if you choose to have a family down the road. It's not going to get you out of mom and dad's house down the road. Those of us that are parents are like, seriously. All right, so what do we need to know about this segment of non-consumers? On a high level, they look just like the students who do enroll in our colleges. So over on the left-hand side, we can see about 60% of them are still living with mom and dad, many times still in their same bedroom as that they grew up in, and very, very, very comfortable, says the mom whose oldest is moving home very soon. 1 in 3 aren't working at all. So yes, many of them are out there working jobs that are paying more than they've ever paid in the past, but about 1/3 of them aren't even working. And then when we look over on the right-hand side, we see that demographically they look very, very similar. So when we look at median household income for non-consumers as compared to those who do opt into college, there's about a $9,000 difference. And I'm not going to suggest $9,000 is nothing, but all of us that have been working in higher ed for more than a minute knows that that's something that can be bridged through financial aid, additional support, work study, being more flexible so that they can maintain their job while they're going to school, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not a deal breaker, and certainly not the main cause for students opting out. Racially, ethnically, they look exactly like our student demographics. The big difference is that they tend to be slightly more likely to be male than female, which of course makes sense because if we look at college enrollment, it tends to be more female dominated. So then why aren't they enrolling? Down in the bottom here, we actually have a survey that was conducted by one of your neighbors up in Pennsylvania, over in Pennsylvania, whatever the correlation is from New Jersey. Apparently I didn't do well in geography. And so when they started to see this surge in non-consumers, they decided to poll these students and try to hear more about why. What were some of their concerns about it? And some of the qualitative data is shown here. I didn't want another year of online school. The college process was actually a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I am positive that a lot of your grant and funded initiatives are trying to tackle that issue. And then of course some of the financial concerns, bridging some of the gap for students who are struggling financially. This was the slide I thought I was pulling up just a moment ago. This again is coming from a survey. This one was done by New America. So what New America did a little under a year ago, so this was November of 2022, they called 500 students who said that they were going to enroll in the fall semester but had chosen not to. They also called 500 students who had stopped out of a community college and planned to return that fall and didn't end up on campus. So essentially all these students who had great intentions of enrolling in their local community college but didn't show up for one reason or another, and they said, why not? You can choose from this whole list of options. You can choose multiple if you want to, and this is how that data bore out. So over in the teal color, those are those that had said they wanted to go to a community college for the first time. They're the aspirants. And then in the dark blue, you have those students who had previously enrolled in a community college and planned to return that fall semester, but still didn't end up back on campus. The big takeaway that I wanted to call out here is, number one, we can see that finances are a big player here. There aren't, for most of us that have been in higher education, any major surprises here. These are things that we've been tackling for more than a decade in higher education. But one of the things that I found most surprising here is that regardless of whether they had engaged in higher education or not, their reasons for not enrolling with us are actually very, very similar. There aren't any major outliers here when we think about the reasons that people aren't enrolled. So I'm actually going to pause here, and I want you to be thinking about your grant programs. How many of you are trying to tackle some of these issues, and is there something that you can share about those efforts, some of the challenges or some of the successes, and kind of, what are you all doing to address some of these problems?
I can share something that happened literally while I was walking over.
Fantastic.
So Jess and I are working with the Reconnect program, which is trying to help stop out students and whatnot. And one of the students that I just ran into, we're trying to get into a leadership program within the grant program. And he said, I really, really want to do it, but I can't because I got to work. I'm a tutor here, and I need the hours.
Right.
And he went on and on about how it's very difficult. He's here by himself, and he needs more cash. And I thought, this is so sad because we're creating these programs with all this great stuff.
Yeah.
But if they have to work for our minimum wage jobs, which no disrespect there, they can't take advantage of it, which is problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the pushes that I make a lot of the time when I'm talking to other institutional leaders is that it is so important that we make sure that students don't feel like they have to necessarily choose. Sometimes there's only so many hours in the day, right? And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. That is the reality of the situation. But whatever we can do to make sure that we're providing a comparable wage to what they'd be earning off campus, and making sure that we are giving them that flexibility to be able to stay engaged and successful in their classes while they're also working the jobs on campus. But you're right, I mean, there's only so much time. And so if that student is also, trying to raise kids or, something along those lines, it can really add to the challenge. I saw somebody, there we go.
The third one from the top for motivation for students. So the grant that I'm part of, which is the Teaching Excellence Project, really focuses on how we can re-engage our students for the best student success. And so we offered a whole AQ program for our instructors, and they, over a course of several semesters, took modules, and they learned, or in some cases relearned, because if you've been teaching for a long time, you'd be surprised at how many things you forget.
Right.
How to infuse different strategies to engage our students, to offer a sense of belonging, because if we make our students feel like they belong here, then we can retain them, they'll stay here. So that is just an example of what we've been doing.
You're absolutely right, and it actually reminds me of kind of a funny story. I went to one of our, this was a 4-year partner, and it was the VP of enrollment, and he was sharing with me that his daughter was, like 10th, 11th grade, starting to get all of the recruitment messages and all of that, and so as a VP, he went to her and he said, which one of these appeals to you the most, and tell me why. So she pulls up one, it was literally just one sentence, and it said, you belong here. And that made her want to go to that institution. I don't know that she ultimately ended up enrolling in that one, but your whole point about students kind of coming out of the pandemic and trying to figure out where they fit and how do they fit, et cetera, belongingness has never been more important than it is right now. Anybody else want to share how you're tackling some of these challenges? Yes.
So I work in the career services department, and One of the things that I noticed, I was doing a focus to, it's a career assessment tool that we give our students, that we
Did you
offer
say
our
focus
students.
too?
Focus 2.
We
correct.
actually do that in all of the classes that I teach.
It's a really great tool.
It is.
So as I was going through the slides, just thinking about some of the challenges that I experienced and I see that other people experience, I started to address some of those things. So having to work before the student even gets to that point, or whether they're experiencing it at the moment, I kind of said, well, if you're working, they might want to offer you another position, but there might be an educational requirement. As much as they want to give it to you, because you don't have that degree, it won't be available to you.
Right.
So that gives you a cap. And the students were kind of like, they weren't thinking about that, right? Or losing your sense of self-motivation, right? Not having motivation, addressing that, showing them that there is a connection to where you are right now and where you want to be, right? So there's like so many different points, but the main thing is helping them to see the long-term vision,
Exactly.
not right now.
I think you're exactly right with that. I think that one of the things that I hear from students all the time is that they don't necessarily feel those connections between what they're doing today, especially in the classroom. One example that I always use with that, when I was doing my dissertation research, one of the interviews that I was conducting with a student, she was just coming out of one of her English Lit classes. And so she came in a little fired, and she was like, why am I spending all of this time learning about Shakespeare? What does that have to do with my marketing degree? And she just went on and on and on. And I realized that this is one of those things that we don't do particularly well. When we tell students to go work on a group project, every student, a lot of students, cringe, and they're like, oh, group projects. And it's like, well, we're not doing it for us. This is not, but when they look at job descriptions, one of the first requirements is you need to be able to work on a team. When they're actually presenting the research that they learned, et cetera, it's not because we want to hear them speak, though we do all love hearing them speak. It's because in a few years, you're going to be sitting at the head of a conference table sharing your work with your boss or with other colleagues, but they don't see those connections between what they're doing here and where they're trying to go. So the more we can do to kind of double down on that, I think you're absolutely right. All right, let's go ahead and go forward from here. All right, so we're going to dive into two populations. Again, we already talked about non-consumers. Those are those recent high school graduates who are just simply opting out of higher education. And then our post-traditional learners, they may be adult learners. They may be part-time learners. They may be online students. They may be a student who completed a GED program instead of a traditional high school program. These are students that we know are vulnerable in our systems because historically they have not had a whole lot of success in our college campuses. So when we think about those post-traditional learners, one of the key points that I want to make is that when we think about this population, one thing that is consistent across all of these different groups is they have a lot of competing responsibilities. Whether they are working, whether they are affiliated with the military in one way or another, whether it's because they happen to be adult and therefore independent. They may have children of their own. All of these things are going to take their attention away from higher education. And that's exactly the way it should be. I mean, we would never want it any other way. They should be focused on those things that are so critically important to them. But it means that we have to be able to flex and adapt in order to support them when they are on campus. The problem is that for a lot of these students, they come to a college campus and they're not necessarily welcomed in with a whole lot of support. And again, obviously you all are here because you're addressing some of these challenges. But one of the things that we've heard over and over is that for a lot of our post-traditional learners, they have limited access to after-hours support. The requirement to connect with an advisor, financial aid, etc., requires an in-person visit on campus. For a lot of our students with these competing responsibilities, and especially with the traffic around New Jersey, that's really, really tough for them to be able to do. The students who end up having to miss a class because somebody gets sick or their boss makes them stay late at work, they're penalized for those absences. They may not even be looking to us for basic needs support. I know obviously as grant-funded programs, you all have been focused on this quite a bit without a doubt, but a lot of the time students don't know to even look to us for this kind of help. And then down in the bottom, we have some of those curricular challenges that post-traditional learners run into as well. One of the things that we know is that for a lot of these post-traditional learners, they will end up having to enroll part-time. And if there aren't milestone credentials along the way to their degree, they may end up with a lot of credits under their belt and no value in the job that they are doing outside of their academic experience, and therefore not necessarily getting that pay bump, etc. So whenever we can include meaningful milestone credentials, don't just, like, hey, here's a general studies certificate, congratulations. And then the other piece that we want to be looking at is what can we do in order to support credit for their past experiences. For a lot of our adult learners in particular, they've been working for a few years. Does any of that connect to college requirements, college coursework? I see you nodding quite a bit. Is this an effort that you all have been making here?
It's just something I've heard a lot.
Yeah.
And 0 degrees and then trying to transfer credits, work experience.
Yeah, it's so important. We're not going to dive into it very deeply today, but it is something that we have a bunch of research on. So if this ends up becoming kind of a priority for anybody going forward, again, let us know. We'll share with you what we have. For our students who are post-traditional learners and low income, those challenges become even more difficult. When I was doing interviews with students in our program over at Nova, one of the things that I was really struck by was this lovely image that students came into us with, that they were going to spend a third of their time on their family, focused on being the best mom or dad that they could possibly be. A third of the time focused on work, they're going to be the great stand-up employee that they'd always been. And then that remaining third would be spent on academics. Never mind the fact that this doesn't include sleep. Sleep is for the weak and college students don't need it. But very, very quickly, life started to happen for a lot of our students. Maybe their spouse has some kind of a medical emergency, and so they spend a little bit less time focused on their academics. Their boss, who said that they could have Tuesday and Thursday evenings off, now comes to them and says, hey, I'm so sorry, but Thursdays going forward, I'm going to need you here. Maybe the sister who said that she could provide childcare throughout the entire semester suddenly says, hey, I'm sorry, my schedule just doesn't allow it anymore. And then the student has to try to find another babysitter if they can even afford one. And anybody who has small kids right now can tell you childcare is ridiculously expensive right now. Maybe the student is on their way to their midterm, their car breaks down. Not only did they miss their midterm, but if they can't afford that car repair, they're going to continue to miss classes going forward. And then, of course, as we talked about before, if a student doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, there's no way they're focused on what's happening in the classroom. And then, as so many of us have seen before, maybe one of our students experiences job loss. And not only are they dealing with the mental consequences of having lost their job, but now it might actually destabilize their schedule, their ability to pay for classes, their ability to be able to put gas in the car to be able to get to campus. And very quickly we can see how academics is just kind of squeezed out of their priorities. There's not a world where I'm saying that this is not the way it should be. Of course, they should be more focused on their family and their jobs and making sure that their basic needs are met, et cetera, et cetera. But what the push here is that we need to be able to flex and adapt in order to support students as they face all of these challenges. Because if we're going to bring them onto our campuses, we have to make sure that they have a pathway to graduation. And of course, we want these students on our campuses. We've talked to countless faculty leaders, student support leaders, people that are engaging with these students, and we hear over and over that this is a very, very motivated student population. They're not here because mom and dad told them that they needed to enroll in college. They're here because it was a decision they made for their lives. They also bring in a wealth of experiences. The conversations that post-traditional learners bring into our classrooms tend to be very, very rich. They're able to apply the material into a professional environment, share those details out. And then, of course, they tend to be a very independent student population. A lot of the time, they are pretty self-sufficient and on their way. That can come back and bite them sometimes because sometimes they're too independent, and we actually had a resource that could have actually supported whatever challenge they were facing. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword, but overall, we definitely want these folks on campus. The last point I wanted to make in this section about various different student populations is thinking about part-time learners. As we talked about before, when they have competing responsibilities, it's very likely they're going to enroll with us part-time instead of full-time. One thing that I found really interesting when I pulled up your data, you are right there with the national level. You are at 64% of your students are part-time. And again, as we know, that is normally an indication that they have a lot of competing responsibilities. It might mean that they're working jobs that are off campus, and frankly, historically, the data for part-time learners demonstrates that we really need to give them some additional support. All right, so with that, we're going to shift into the practices that I wanted to call out related to both of these student populations. We've got about 45 minutes to go through these practices, but one of the pushes that I want to make is, again, stop me. If this is a practice that you are doing, if this is a practice that you've tried, if this is a practice that you're interested in, let's have a conversation. Seem fair? Okay. So when I think about post-traditional learners, and I think about the traditional age student, I think that there are 4 main ways that we can support both of these populations very effectively. Starting over on the left-hand side, we want to make sure that there aren't really opportunities for gaps in enrollment. One of the things that I used to tell my students all the time is that when you take a summer off, you're creating an opportunity for your life to fill back in, and you're never going to remember how you had set aside that much time for college when the fall comes around again. The second point that I want to make is that we really want to be thinking about easy transitions between modalities, in-person, online, hybrid classes. What can we do to make it easier for students to be able to get a fairly customized experience where they can choose how they want to take the classes that they need to complete their credentials? The third point here is thinking about built-in on and off ramps. So again, recognizing that life is inevitably going to happen for our students. So how can we make it really easy for them to bounce right back and continue on their way to ensure that they're successful? And then the last one is where we have a lot of practices. This idea of serving the whole student. So what do we need to be thinking about as far as student mental health? What do we need to be thinking about with basic needs? What do we want to be thinking about on trying to ease students' access to support? How do we give them sort of a one-stop shop feel so that they're able to always turn in the right direction when they need support? Now, I'm going to go through a number of practices, but I also wanted to give you all some additional resources as well. So what you see on this, those are all active links to much more robust studies, practices. It's really a way for you to kind of go a little bit deeper into this research. And frankly, really we want you to get on the website so that you can actually start seeing how you can use that to be able to support your work on a high level. But if you don't immediately find what you're looking for, again, you can reach out to Joseph or Kabibi, and we will get that information right out to you with whatever resources we do have on the topic you're trying to tackle. So don't forget about this slide. When you look at the slide deck later and you see a duplicate, because this was the, this is where you want to focus. At the very end of today's presentation, there is a slide that walks you right through how you can create a profile on the website. As we mentioned before, it's included with the partnership that you guys already have. So I just want to make sure that you are able to use it. All right, so starting with the importance of sort of a year-round calendar. This data actually came from one of our partners in Texas, where they did an analysis, and what they discovered was for every 100 students that they had on campus at the end of the spring term, only 63 of them showed up in the fall. So that's a huge leaky funnel that we're dealing with. And frankly, if they took summers off, students who would have students who intended to transfer to a four-year institution, they were 44% less likely if they didn't enroll during the summertime. Again, we know that 80% of community college students plan to earn a bachelor's degree at some point. So this again tells us that we're missing the mark on helping students to continue that momentum that they need in order to be successful. So the first practice that I want to share with you here actually comes from Amarillo College, again, another Texas institution. And one of the things that they did was they wanted to make sure that students were on track for on-time graduation. And the way that they were going to do this is by keeping them enrolled during the summer. So we're going to dive into this whole idea of mini-mesters more as we go through this research here. But one of the things that I wanted to call out here is that the beauty of a mini-mester approach is kind of what Amarillo College was able to pull off here. Students only have to focus on 2 classes at a time in order to essentially maintain full-time enrollment. We're not asking them to go out and do 15 credits, prepare for 5 different midterms, 5 different final exams, 5 different, everybody being on the exact same schedule creates a whole lot of stress in our students' lives when they're trying to keep their attention focused in so many different areas. So by moving into this mini-master approach, each student only has to take 6 credits each term, and you can see that by doing so, they're still able to maintain the 30 credits an hour, which sets the student up for on-time graduation by staying enrolled during the summer. Alamo Colleges actually did something very, very similar over there, and the reason that I wanted to share this practice here is because they actually incentivize summertime enrollment. Yes, you had a question?
Just about, does that affect their financial aid that has a minimum requirement for full-time?
Well, they would be hitting it, right? Because for financial aid, typically it's 12 credits would be required.
And
it's reading, fall 1, fall 2, because the financial aid rule is a 15-week term, so those fall within that span.
Right, thank you.
Yep, so it's really helping the students in quite a few ways.
I read, we talked to the folks at Hiking Community College, which also made that switch over to, I mean, their success rate is incredible, how much.
It's kind of like you previewed the slides.
Sorry.
She's reading ahead.
Yeah, they're very successful.
They are, yeah, and we'll talk about their example in more depth in just a moment. So the other point that I wanted to make here was related to Alamo College's district. So the thing that I really like about their approach is that regardless of whether the student was full-time or part-time, they incentivize that summertime enrollment, right? So if the student successfully completed 18 credits during the fall and the spring term, they're entitled to 1 free course during the summer. If they completed 24 credits, they can get 2 free summer courses. So again, even at having completed 24 credits, we're getting them toward that on-time completion. So actually, before I go any further here, so that's sort of all the practices that I have right now on this whole idea of a year-round calendar. What kinds of efforts are you already taking here at PCCC?
We're offering 2 mini terms, as we call them, in the fall and the spring.
Anything to try to keep them going in the summer?
Well, on our Reconnect grant, we didn't get money from the grant, but we are using college commitment money to give them a free summer course and a free winter course.
Love that.
It's a lot of them to max out their financial aid.
But I really love that push, right? Because again, if we can just keep them enrolled, if we can get the retention, and this goes back to that point that I was talking about before, when we think about sustainability and how we actually can have these efforts pay for themselves. If we're keeping a student that would have otherwise stopped out of our institution, that one class was a great investment.
Actually, we look at the students who have leftover financial aid, who have not used it, and pursue them.
Yep.
And then luckily, because we have a very strong foundation in money, for those who do max out, there's funds to pay. So.
Exactly, I love it, great approach. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
We don't have a summer bridge program, we offer, trying to offer classes and some of the math and English that support the practice in the summer so that they can take that right away and then they can get right into their education.
Yeah, I love that because again, it's giving them sort of you're kind of greasing the wheels a little bit for them, right? Making sure that they're getting that preparation, getting them back in the habit of going to school, et cetera, and really setting them up for success. And I saw a hand back there. Yes, in the back.
So one of the large components of our STEM Tracks grant is a summer academy for incoming STEM students, where we give them 2 free classes to start, one of them being a math class, algebra, college algebra, to get them closer to calculus, which they need to be at level to start taking STEM courses.
It's such an important piece, right? I mean, we have, one of the things I remember from being an advisor is that for a lot of our students, especially if they were in the business administration program, it required calculus. And ultimately, we had so many students who were really excited and interested in business and had no interest in math at all. And so we would have that conversation every single time. You really need to start your math. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting here at Nova for how many terms after you've completed everything else. So I love that you're kind of giving them that jolt that they need because it's going to be integral to their success in those academic programs. And if they struggle there, you can have that conversation and figure out what the alternative pathways are. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and switch over to the second opportunity, which was that modality flexibility. So back during the pandemic, I think this survey was done in 2021, if I remember. Nope, this was in December of 2020. One of the questions that they posed to community college students was, how do you prefer to take classes? And you can see that regardless of whether they were continuing students, stopped out students, newly enrolled students, considered enrolling in higher education but did not, for the most part they want some kind of online component as part of that educational experience. Now, I'm not saying that everything needs to be fully online. That would be the bright blue category, and none of the categories had anywhere more than just about a third of the students. But overall, there is a strong push for some kind of a mix between online and in-person modalities. So this is a practice that we first profiled. I want to say maybe, it's funny, I'm looking at Steve because I'm like, I know you saw it whenever we initially did this. It was maybe, 2018, something like that. And I had just started at EAB. I've worked with post-traditional learners my entire career. So I started with military members while my family was stationed overseas. I started working in the Pentagon, helping people figure out what they wanted to do when the military was no longer telling them what they needed to be doing. And then I went on to NOVA, where the program that I led served post-traditional learners. And when I saw this practice, there was never a practice that I had seen that would have had a greater impact on the students that I've served for my entire career than this one. So this one comes from Lakeshore Technical College. During the pandemic, this practice started to become known as high flex. But the idea was that students could choose literally on a day-to-day basis on whether, I see some eye rolls, I see them, on a day-to-day basis whether they were going to attend the class in person or whether they were going to attend the class online. So again, we see a number of situations called out here. An ER visit, so they end up missing a couple of classes, maybe they broke an ankle, it's hard for them to get to campus. We talked about before, childcare losses, somebody who maybe is a military member and is being sent TDY, and then they're back face-to-face, and then they get sent TDY again. By having this high flex approach, these students are able to stay on pace with the rest of their class, even if they can't physically be there. So again, like I said, this was one of those practices that just blew me away because I thought that this would be so incredibly helpful to students. And we saw more institutions adopt this during the pandemic when we had restrictions on how many folks could be in person. One thing that I found really interesting is that data point that you see in the lower right-hand corner there. When they deployed this approach, they actually saw the gap between the performance of part-time students and full-time students close by 63%. So again, thinking about those students with competing responsibilities, this is a way for them to stay engaged. So I will pause and let this one be vetted by the audience. What are our thoughts on this practice?
I think it's great because not everyone, there are students, right, who are just coming up with excuses not to come. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case for everyone. Some people really need that type of flexibility. They really want to be online. They really want to be in person, but when push comes to shove, if online is there and it's available, that's another way that they can still get here. So having the flexibility, I think, is really important.
Life is messy, right?
Right.
All right, go ahead.
I think there's another side that needs just to be considered is the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's just getting them up to speed so that they can teach.
So that they're comfortable with this modality. Yep. I think that's a really great push. I thought you were going to go in a different direction regarding the faculty.
I'm doing it now, so I could.
One of the things that I hear a lot of the time when I'm presenting this is like, well, yeah, but then the students aren't going to be there. Like the professor is going to be there lecturing to 3 students in the classroom. And overall, I'm glad that because that has not been the case. And when Lakeshore Tech, when we profiled them, that was one of the pushes that we made on them. Is like, okay, so talk to us about the downsides. And the faculty members were telling us too that the students do absolutely show up. They really do want that in-person connection when they can, but when life gets messy, they needed that flexibility.
We are piloting this.
Yes.
Are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just going to ask our dean for just consent to speak to that.
Or are you the dean for?
I'm the associate dean. So we piloted 3 high flex courses.
Okay.
We piloted one in the fall of last year, and then looking at the grade distributions, no one withdrew from the high flex class.
Wow.
And in terms of the passing rate, even though it was one class, it's not statistically significant, passing wise, it beat all the other modalities.
That's fascinating.
So then we piloted 2 more in the spring of last year. Again, no one withdrew from the classes, and it finished 3rd overall.
Okay.
So
So really good indications on data, at least right now.
Yeah.
But to your point, they might even go up higher with additional professional development for the faculty who are teaching them. That's great.
I'm just curious, and maybe Serena, you have this information. So when this is offered, when these options are offered, in general, are we finding that they're opting for the online over the in-person? Is there a proportion, data on the proportion of how many come online as opposed to how many come in person?
The faculty would have that proportion, so I don't know if you can speak to
but
that.
I think they prefer online.
Online.
But when I talked with Elude, she actually had an online student that she felt he'd probably do better if the person came to a live session, whether class time or remote. So she spoke with the student, and the student started coming to the live things. But you can do that. You can't make them because it's student-centered. The goal is for them to choose. But if you see that this particular modality is not maybe the right fit, you can speak with them and ask them to switch.
I'm sorry, if I could add to that too. Sometimes students feel like I can handle it online, but in having that flexibility, they try it and then they
When you
realize
take that
really
first
quickly
quiz.
that I need to get in person, right? And again, the people who are in person, sometimes they do want to be in person, however, sometimes they need that online in order to fill in that gap.
Yeah, I love that question. I think that's spot on. One of the things I think about my own academic experience sometimes. I was a parenting student and a military spouse and working and all of the things that make things challenging. And the way I used to set up my schedule was that I would do 2 classes in the first 8 weeks, 2 classes in the second 8 weeks, and then one, whatever my hardest class was going to be, that was the one that I was going to take for the full semester. And then I would choose the modality based on my confidence in that class as well. A lot of the time, to your point, students opt for online, but they may not necessarily be realizing that the conversation, I teach online still today, and I've been teaching online for about 14 years now, and the conversation I have with my students in the beginning of the term is that the beauty of online is not that it's easier, it's definitely not easier. It's not that you don't have to show up to class. It's that you get to choose when your class time is. If you want to choose to enroll in my class and take your classes at midnight, fine. Log in at midnight, that's fine. But you still have to set the same amount of time aside as you would have if we were mandating that you were there in person. And sometimes that kind of triggers something different for students where they realize, oh, I do actually have to commit to something in order to make sure I have the time to be successful in this class.
I think during the pandemic, one issue that I saw, and not necessarily at Passaic, because I wasn't here, students got confused about the language. Because in high school, they were saying you're taking classes online, which really didn't mean what we call online.
Because it was synchronous.
It was synchronous, virtual. Had to have your cameras on, couldn't be in bed, blah, blah, blah. So I think that that's a disconnect, and I don't know if that happened at Passaic, but it's hard to get students to commit to certain modalities because they don't have the same definition as we do.
Right.
They may not know what high flex is. They may not choose it, even though that would be the best option.
Exactly.
But in general, in distance ed, to me, that's a major issue because in distance ed across the board, we're not all on the same page with what we call high flex.
Yes, exactly.
We're not all on the same
Exactly.
page with what we call online and remote. Yeah.
From institution to institution, that varies widely.
Yeah.
And I bet if you did a survey of even our own faculty and employees and advisors, they might not all think the same thing, right? They would,
And even when we think,
But how many read them and know them?
Forget them. You're publicized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
even when we do think that we're being explicit and making it as clear as we possibly can, I can tell you again, I teach 4 sections of college success skills every single term, and every term I have at least 4 students who contact me saying, when do we meet? We don't. It's an online class, and we're 10 days into it.
work with students to make sure they understand what the different modalities look like, and also as well in college success. So I think between college success and between the students meeting with their advisors, even if they're walking in, we're always having those conversations because it is very confusing.
Absolutely.
So I just want to put that out there. It is like, it's part of the learning process, but between college success, the advising office, we're constantly pushing, what does this language mean? What's the difference between remote, hybrid, online? What would that experience look like? We even have a checklist that we go over when the students come in. If you decide to take an online class, there's some very important things you have to understand about the commitment.
Yeah.
So they come in confused, but they leave knowing what's going on.
You're hitting on something else that's really important too, though, is that at least the students here know who to contact when they have those questions, right? So many of the students at various different community colleges across the country feel like they're kind of in this on their own, and they're just kind of bumbling along instead of being able to turn to a trusted advisor or college success skills instructor and get that support.
I have a question about HighFlex. I was wondering if you could perhaps provide us a list of courses that maybe some community colleges are running HighFlex. Our model actually came from Lehman, and they were only doing general ed.
Okay. Let's see. Here is my main. You are my main contact.
Okay.
Would you mind just making the note, and then I will submit that to our 1EAB and give you the list. Okay. All right. So this one is actually Trident Tech, which is the college in South Carolina. So they are one of our longtime partners. And what is really interesting about their approach to mini-mesters is that they kind of did the rip the Band-Aid off approach. They shifted everything to 7-week terms. Now I will tell you that there was this one time that I was doing a presentation to all the community colleges in South Carolina, and the chief academic officer for Trident Tech raises her hand and she says, just to be clear, it's not all of them. I was like, oh my God, I've been presenting this for years at this point. You tell me more. She's like, well, we tried to shift our horticulture classes to 7-week terms, and we realized we couldn't make plants grow.
And they're nursery because of accreditation.
I was like, okay, all right. So everything except horticulture, all right. But what you see called out along the top of this slide here, it really kind of calls out why this is so important. And for any of us who are working with first-time college students, one of the things that we see all the time is that students think that the only path forward is to be a full-time student. So they go ahead, they sign up for 12 credits, make sure that they're maximizing their financial aid, they start taking those classes, and 3/4 of the way through the term, something happens. The student gets sick, a family member gets sick, they lose their job, whatever the case may be, they withdraw from the entire semester, and there is literally no way for us to be able to get them back on track into the future. They're going to lose their financial aid. They'll start off on SAP warning, but there's no way to actually make up that many credits in the next term, and therefore they end up losing their financial aid, which means that they've lost their ability to be able to enroll, all because they were trying to do the right thing. They were trying to enroll full-time because that's what they were supposed to do. So when you shift into an approach like mini-mesters, one of the beauties of this is that when life happens a little bit further down the road in the term, they've already got a few credits under their belt that they've been successful in. Or say that the problem happens there in the first part of the term, they can still take classes in the second part of the term. There's a way to come back from a life event in a way that is almost impossible when you're talking about a 15 or 16-week term. Now, the data that you see down here at the bottom really gets to the point that you were talking about before. They saw a 14 percentage point increase in course pass rates after implementing mini-mesters. They also saw their retention rates go up, and overall, a lot of the student success metrics have been increasing. Let me see if I included, yes. This is the other slide that we actually created based on some of the data that they shared with us, where they were able to demonstrate to us that when they were in 14-week, when using 14-week classes, this is what their success rate looked like. When they shifted into the 7-week, they saw it go up. But one of the most important pieces is that some of the students that they had most struggled to graduate and serve actually outperformed the rest of the population when they shifted to the mini-mesters. So again, really, really promising data coming out of Trident Tech there. This is pretty consistent. I talk to hundreds of community colleges every year. There's only been 1 or 2 that really didn't see a positive connection when they made that shift.
How many of the schools you've spoken to have switched everything? And how many
Not as many. Yeah, I would say that it would be fewer than 10% have shifted everything.
Because that's the only thing I still worry about, students who enroll in 17-week and then, or 15-week, and then to 6-week. Are they confusing themselves? Are they, they have two different paces to go with their classes and.
But some of them are strategic in it, right? I mean, that was the point that I was making before, that sometimes it's very intentional, that when I'm taking that math class, you better bet that was taken over 15 weeks. But when I was taking my English, my psychology, my humanities courses, those ones I would always take on a faster track. But it is important that students know that. One of the key points that I wanted to make here is that when we think about providing support, actually before we get into this one, I just realized, any questions about the on and off ramps, moving into mini-mesters, etc. This is sort of the last slide for this third opportunity, which is focused on making it easier for students to rebound after life happens. And it doesn't have to be mini-masters. What are some of the supports that you're putting into place? The Reconnect program might be a good example here. It might be something else that other grant-funded programs are doing here in order to help students sort of be more resilient and be able to stay on track for graduation.
The main part of our grant is to connect with students, assign them with a success coach. So the coach is checking in with them regularly and can offer them the holistic supports, connecting with holistic supports if things come up. Give them good guidance.
Yeah.
But we're new, so I'll give you the data once we get through.
That's totally fair. And as far as the Reconnect program, we actually have quite a bit of research on stop-outs. And so, again, happy to share any of that.
So, along with Alex Delafarra, who spoke earlier, and Sabrina, our grant, Teacher Excellence Project, so we're trying to improve teaching and learning in the classroom. We started with providing supplemental instruction in the classroom. Also, last year, we took part in a little initiative where we tried reaching out to all students who had incompletes in their courses. And just by reaching out to those students and what we found, most of them just didn't have a plan. And so we were like, if you want, you can come here, we can talk about your plan, the assignments that you need to work on. We have these lab students that can come in and we can kind of coach you through that, or at least set that aside, because we know that a lot of our students do not have a healthy environment at home for study. So that was one initiative that we took off with, working with them with enrollment.
I love that idea, and I think that that's such an overlooked opportunity at most campuses. We all set up some kind of a policy where, the student gets the incomplete, and then after X amount of time, then it turns into whatever the default grade would have been for that student. Most of the time, it's an F for the student. But nobody's really giving students support on how to do that. They don't have their syllabus to still be working from. They don't have the academic calendar to be working from. And they might have actually gone on to other courses, which makes it even less top of mind for students. So I love that you did that and tried to give them some coaching and guidance on how you're going to get across the finish line.
Yeah, it was really all about making the plan, because most of them, in the midst of whatever was happening that caused them to, whether it was drop out, stop, or get those incompletes, but really it was like, you have so many assignments, we have this much time, you have this time frame, come in and let's talk about it, so the assignment, and let's make that plan.
Love that, that's great. Anybody else want to share any practices that they're deploying in their grant?
This isn't on a grant, but on the college side, I know the pathway advisors, when they advise students, I don't know if this is off, but typically for like the 6A, the mini-mesters, 6B courses, which are the mini-mesters again, they tell students it's 15 weeks worth of classes in 6 weeks.
Right.
So it's not that it's just shorter. They recommend that students take 2 classes. In theory, sure, you could take 3 or 4 classes. However, they highly recommend the students to take 2, being mindful that it is 15 weeks, again, worth of courses in that.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important push, making sure students are making informed decisions. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying before about, split attention, if they're in 15-week and 6-week and, all of that. So, So we're going to go ahead and transition into our final key opportunity here. So this one is really focused on how we can support the whole student. So one key point that I wanted to make here is that it is not typically academic challenges that cause students to leave. It is the whole slew of other factors that really, I'm sorry?
Life.
Exactly, it's life that causes students to leave. In fact, 72% of college dropouts leave for non-academic reasons. It's money, it's belongingness, it's work-life balance, it's family obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So the practices that we're going to be sharing across the next few minutes are really, and I will say that these are, I put more practices into this part of the presentation than I did any other part, because I think that this is one of the areas that grant-funded projects really focus a lot of attention, and so I want this to be an opportunity for us to kind of explore some of these. So the first approach that I'm going to share here actually comes from Pueblo Community College out in Colorado. Again, they have been working with us for years, and so I've been monitoring this program really closely because it reminds me so much of the program that I did my dissertation research on. The whole idea is giving students a single point of contact for any challenge, question, inquiry, etc. They always go to the same person. From the time they apply to the institution until the day that they graduate from the institution, they go to their success coach for any kinds of questions. Their success coach can handle all of the different things that you see called out around that circle. When the student is initially being onboarded into the institution, it would be the success coach that lets them know, hey, you were selected for verification, you're gonna need to complete this basic paperwork. If the student is, has some kind of domicile issue, it would be the success coach that says, hey, they need this kind of paperwork in order to resolve this hold on your account. Once the student gets started in their academic programming, they're also monitoring their financial aid, serving as sort of that first point of contact. Now, I want to be clear, these are not superheroes. They're superheroes, yes, but they're not like the unicorn on campus that happens to know all of these things really, really in depth. They're sort of like a triage center. That is where the student turns, and if the success coach needs to get more in-depth support from financial aid, it's the success coach that makes the connection to financial aid. It's the success coach that connects with the enrollment office when the student has some kind of a domicile issue. It's really just trying to make it as streamlined for the student as possible so they don't fall through the cracks. As they continue on in their academic pursuit, they provide very basic academic advising. The student is also assigned a faculty advisor when they're at Pueblo, but that academic advisor can go ahead and provide some context around transfer opportunities, career exploration, really just trying to give them sort of a baseline of support, helping them know where they can go as they grow. Moving up along the side, they also do a lot of the proactive outreach, checking in with students, after they get their first week of classes under their belt. Say, you've seen the syllabi now. Do you feel like you can handle the course load and the course expectations? Try to give them that off-ramp if they need it while they can still drop the classes. They reach out again around midterms and make sure that students are feeling like they're well prepared for their tests and make sure that they're on track for success. One thing that I think is particularly unique is they also are the first point of contact for special funding. And the reason behind that I think is really interesting. Essentially what they told us is the reason that they have the success coach serve as that first point of contact for special funding instead of having the student go through the financial aid office is because they want to make sure that they're addressing whatever the root cause of that financial concern is. So is it that you lost your job or your parents lost their job? Is it actually something more foundational, like the distance between what you earn and your ability to be able to pay for college is insurmountable, so it would actually be a rough investment for the college to be able to invest that money? Is there some additional coaching or financial literacy training that we can provide to the student? What can we do to make sure that they're set up for success when they do receive this specialized funding? Now, I heard that you guys have coaches. I don't know if they're this robust. Who can tell me a little bit more about those? Or did I make it up?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, we do. They are not quite this robust. I mean, our success coaches don't necessarily monitor SAP or process verification and appeals for financial aid or anything like that. But they are our students' first point of contact, and I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, that's right. Have you seen any kind of does every student get a success coach? Is it for specific populations?
In this program, in the Reconnect program, they do, and in the success program that just finished, they did as well, and I think that they're wonderful.
Love that. if we make it to that point, in the ROI for student success part of this content, we actually profiled Pueblo again, because when they initiated this, the success coaching model, they actually started just with their trio students. And one of the things that I really love about the way that they deploy this is that their trio students, so highest need, hardest to serve population, were actually outperforming their general population. And that's when they were like, oh, we might be onto something. And so they ended up elevating it to the state of Colorado, saying, you know, we don't have the resources to be able to scale this across the entire community college. However, we do think that this is a promising practice, and the state of Colorado actually gave them the seed funding. And they said, hey, we're going to do this for 5 years, and if your success coaches are not paying for themselves at the end of those 5 years, the money is gone. But again, they built that case to be able to say this is the best practice for serving students in our community, and then they scaled it up by being really innovative. And I think that's what we all need to be thinking about with grant-funded dollars.
Christina, most of the grants that we have, there's a requirement that there be at least one strategy that's evidence-based, and it has to address what works clearinghouse and the standards of promising evidence. So the Insight Track study from several years ago provided evidence of student success coaching. So that's probably the initiative that we have embedded the most into our grant-funded program. So I think there are probably at least like 10 success coaches that are paid for with grant funding. They've been embedded into initiatives like STEM, our student support services programs, our pathways to teacher certification, a whole range. And it seems like pretty much every grant that we're going after, like especially if there's a requirement on the part of the funding source to have an evidence-based practice and strategy, it's been success coaching, and the results that we've been getting have been tremendous as well. I know within pathways to teacher certification, also STEM, like those retention rates for students, who are being served by a success coach have really been phenomenal.
Yeah, and especially in programs like STEM, right? I mean, some of those programs that are so hard to be able to get through and like that, seeing those kinds of outsized impacts are just really, really powerful. Any other questions, thoughts on this one? All right. So this one is actually the Reconnect program at York Tech. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I suspect that it's actually very, very similar to the work that you all are doing. But the whole idea here is that the state of South Carolina actually decided to launch a Reconnect program. There are a few things that I think are really special about this program in particular. So at York Tech, it's something like 50 different programs. I don't know if yours has limitations on the programs. At York Tech, they require that the program has to be market in demand. That's done through local labor market data. Again, the idea being if we're going to bring these students back through, help them actually reach an education credential, let's make sure that there's a job on the other side of completion. I'm sorry?
Not for the philosophy.
And not for the philosophy student. Yeah. No, I was an English major, a great major, but yep. So I'm not going to focus on the left-hand side because I think that part of it actually looks very similar to the Pueblo Community College model that I was talking about before. But I wanted to call your attention to what you see over on the right-hand side. So some of the things that York Tech feels like has made their Reconnect program a huge success. Number one, of course, free tuition. That is one of the biggest benefits of a Reconnect program, is that this is your chance to not go further into debt and complete that thing that you've always been aspiring to complete. The second point is that they have carousel enrollment. So through a conversation with them, we realized that students at York Tech could literally start any month of the year. So even in July, January, January, we all have but December, they could start classes in December. It was just really, really surprising to me that they were able to set up their terms in such a way that students could get started. We could take advantage of that momentum when the student felt like it was the right time. Again, as I mentioned before, when I was at Nova, I led a college access and success program for low-income adults. Without fail, our phones were ringing off the hook come about September 7th or 8th. When their kids went back to school and they were like, oh, I'm ready now. Like, great, the term started 10 days ago. So having that carousel enrollment, having those alternative classes that students can get into, regardless of when they get that inspiration to be able to re-engage, is a really, really valuable key to their success. Flexible terms, kind of along the same lines. They have, shortened terms, they have longer terms. That's what I mean by the flexibility there. Short-term credentials, again, one of the requirements for their Reconnect program is that the student has to be able to complete the credential within 12 months. That's a tough one, right? Because if a student only had a class or two under their belt, they're probably not going to go complete that associate's degree within 12 months. However, they might be able to complete a certificate along that pathway. Now they're actually getting some success under their belts. They're able to continue persisting even after completing that short-term credential. And then that leads directly into that idea of stackable credentials, making sure that they actually feed into each other. We're not having the student complete this credential, and then ta-da, you can start right over with these 60 credits required for this academic program. Let's make sure that they actually nest into each other. So this one actually shifts gears entirely, and it's really focused more on mental health support. So one of the things that we've heard over and over from institutional leaders is that we all recognize there is a surge in mental health challenges with students who are coming up today. The challenge is that for a lot of faculty members, they may not necessarily know where to turn for resources to be able to support students. So you have the students sitting in the back of the classroom, sobbing during class. The faculty member doesn't necessarily always know what to do, how to handle that conversation. So this practice is actually called the red folder practice. Has anybody ever heard of the red folder practice? The whole idea is that there would be a red folder issued to every faculty member, available in every single classroom, that actually takes them through sort of an emergency protocol to be able to navigate some of these more challenging conversations. So over on the right-hand side, you can see that they actually script it out so that when faculty members are thinking about some of the situations they might encounter, they get a sense of the sorts of things that they might say. We know it's not going to be 100% verbatim. They're not going to be lucky enough to have the exact conversation that's on there, but it's really just trying to give them the information that they need about how to navigate that really challenging situation. The other push that I would make here is that they also provide this information so that they can see what resources are available to students. One of the things that I think has been particularly challenging, and I'm not sure if you all are encountering that here at Passaic, but many times the first recommendation is go to the counseling center. The counseling center, they'll be able to, get a one-on-one with you. And so the counseling centers are just overwhelmed. That is true whether you have counseling here on your campus or whether you're using community-based counseling. It's hard to get in because there has been such a deluge of requests. Instead, we want to be looking at some of those intermediate steps along the way before we get to a point where the student really needs to engage with somebody in a one-on-one conversation. What resources can we connect them to be able to deal with some of their anxiety challenges or some of their stresses about college or some of the other challenges that so many students are facing. We're seeing more and more institutions actually use peer advising in order to help students get connected to other students who are dealing with some of the same challenges that they are. So again, the idea behind the red folder is to get information into the hands of essentially first responders, so the people that are going to be in front of those students when some of these challenges come to light. So before we move off this idea of mental health, how are you handling the mental health crisis here at Passaic?
I'm a part of the Wellness and Basic Needs grant. So right now, like you're saying, it is very challenging. Our team is growing, but prior it was only one social worker here.
Oh well.
So it was very challenging for her. But right now we do have MOUs with community partners around mental health, food, insecurity, as well as housing, and we're connecting with them and referring our students out if needed. We do short-term, I don't want to call it therapy, but just short-term care. We don't give long-term therapy, but we are partnering with outside agencies. And then I also want to share, I've never actually heard of the red folder, and I want to bring this back to the team and implement it for sure. But also just want to add, right now we're working on a resource QR code guide to put it out to the campus, just so students can just scan it. And it's going to be color coded based on their needs and concerns, so they do know who to reach. So I definitely just wanted to share that.
So the idea being something along the lines of like when you go to the doctor's office and they have the different, they're like, where are you on pain? How did that?
Yeah, similar to that, but also we're just in the process now of opening our wellness center, just addressing a lot of different needs for our students. So we're still in the process, but we're getting there.
I love it. I'm excited to see it. And again, if there's a way that we can support those efforts, we actually do have a mental health collaborative where we bring together institutional leaders. It's all virtual, so you'll just be signing in online. But essentially, it's normally whoever is in charge of the counseling resources on the campus, and then whoever would actually be sort of the boots on the ground, they would go through it together. And you would be with other institutions who are taking on mental health, and it's a series of 4 different workshop days. Yeah, so if that's something that you're interested in, let me know. I'll show you more information.
Our director can't be here today. Her name's Leah Travers, but I'll definitely share that with her. Maybe she can get that information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other thoughts on the mental health challenges?
It's just growing. I mean, she mentioned Leah. We only hired Leah maybe 5 years ago because we felt the need to bring on a full-time social worker, and then she's on board, and we've had to expand the department to the whole wellness. But recognizing, right, that the obstacles that students face in that area interfere with their studies.
And especially coming out of the pandemic. I mean, you're talking about isolation on top of some of the social challenges of, not having been engaged, what that did to mental health. And it's a generation of students who's much more comfortable talking about mental health. So while other people might have just, bit down and bore it a decade ago, many times they're actually seeking help and asking for additional support.
And I was thinking, I just thought of it this week, years ago, we had a student went through a placement test, we had a code 4 or something, but it was a little signal that the student scored so low that there might be a developmental disability or some other literacy issue or something. And at that time, there were so many community organizations. It was easy to refer a student out to all sorts of nonprofits that were in town, in the area that students could get. Those have gone away. Because of
Or they're saturated.
Yeah. So the whole landscape has changed.
Yeah, it has. All right, so this is one of the final slides that I wanted to share with you today. I think that this is going to go to your area of interest in particular. So one of the things that I think is most important for us to be thinking about as community college leaders is how do we actually make sure that what we're doing with our students is preparing them for life after college? How do we make sure that they are being launched successfully into their professions? So I want to be clear that this is not something where I feel like we haven't been doing anything in this space, but I wanted to share a couple of quick thoughts here. So starting over on the left-hand side, we've seen about 10% of institutions that have brought together academic advising and career advising. So this is a pretty big difference than what we've seen in previous generations where those were pretty separate entities and might fall into completely different parts of the college and not necessarily have clear visibility on what the other units are doing. So we're slowly starting to see some movement in that direction.
And we have done.
Yay! So you all are in the top 10%. That's pretty good. But the other point that I want to make here is that about 92% of higher ed leaders believe that we are doing an effective job preparing students for their professional roles. And yet the data point that you see immediately below that, just 11% of business leaders believe that graduates are well prepared for work. This is a data point that has not really changed, and I would actually say that it's getting a little bit worse. Not because we are doing worse, but it's getting worse because that skepticism is ratcheting up. And so people are looking for holes in our model. So it's more important than ever that we're able to draw these connections between what students are doing in the classroom and where they're trying to go professionally. Experiential learning is a really important piece. You can see over on the lower left-hand side there, 75% of college seniors, again, this included 4-year data, reported participation in experiential learning. I would say that number is probably significantly lower in the community college space, but we also have the opportunity to be able to leverage apprenticeships and things like that that don't really happen in the 4-year space. But the key takeaway here is what can we do in order to help students see the value of what they're doing on campus, whether it is participation in a leadership, actually it was you that had mentioned the leadership org, for a student who, is in the Reconnect program, that's an opportunity for them to develop skills that are going to be very marketable in the future, but we need to help them to see how all of those pieces work together to prepare them to be effective in their professional lives. Any thoughts, concerns, ways that you're tackling this issue on campus? Again, recognizing that this is going to be the key to community colleges being solvent going into the future.
I think many of our grants have a service learning component.
Perfect.
And, it's starting to build momentum, and that was how I was first put in on the grant. But that connection from, what you're learning in a classroom to your community, partner to your community is critical.
Mm-hmm.
In education, we tell our students, you're servicing the children that are in the classroom, or you come from the same community that these children come from, so there's just a great circle here.
Yeah.
And there's just no one better, more equipped to teach those kids in the classroom.
Love that.
And that's where we're coming from, so we're building that circle, we're collaborating on a number of issues with service.
I think that's great. And I mean, now what we need to do is to do the same thing in the colleges, right? Make sure that our colleges are reflecting the students that we're serving. But I do love that you're doing that with K-12. Yes.
Okay, so for the career department, back to Focus 2, which is one of the ways that we help the students to get aware of what they could be doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the Focus 2 and then the resume and cover letter development. So we go through each section, just explaining to the students what could they be doing right now. Flipping back to the Focus 2 again, so it has the NACE competencies in there, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. We always encourage the students to take that area so that they could know what areas are they flourishing in, or what areas do they need more support. So whether it's professionalism or leadership skills, and then we challenge them to not just get any job, not take any job, but jobs that can help be more strategic in their job selection, so that way they could start working on those skills and being able to put them on their resume and explain those areas when it's time for them to get employed.
I love that. The only thing that I would add as a potential practice that you could make as sort of that next step is engaging faculty as well, and saying to faculty, what can we do? Could we have a section of student learning outcomes that are framed in the way that we would actually want to see them on a resume, so they can actually translate what they learned in the classroom in a way that makes sense to employers, right? The way we talk in our syllabi, we're not doing students any favors there. And I wonder if that might be another area of opportunity to maybe go a little bit deeper. Have you ever tried doing?
So I'm so sorry. So I just realized that I missed something. As far as, some of the programs have a field work or some type of internship built into it, but in the areas where students don't have that, or even the nursing program, they do have it. However, we try to encourage the students to get in the area. So even if you can't practice as a nurse, go become a receptionist at whatever facility it is. Even if you exactly, so then you can start hearing the terminology or understanding how everything functions, and that way to help you transition and to be able to be able to market yourself better at your interviews.
You're absolutely
so
right.
That's another way.
Yeah, I love that.
The grant I run, applied learning is a major component of the grant. So it's a little slow getting going, but criminal justice is one of our pathways, so we worked since they go out and do internship. The department now actually really relies on us to come in and work with the students. In fact, they say you have to go see our applied learning specialist before you can go out. And she takes them through resume writing and setting up goals for the internship, and then reflecting back on those goals. Was the experience what they thought it would be?
Love that.
And then we're building out some other really good partners for experiences. And by coincidence, a student stopped in the office the other day, and I'm really proud we built a really good relationship with a little zoo in the next county over, really easy. And it's a couple of people, one is a PhD candidate doing a ton of research, so she's happy to have students participate with her. And the student just stopped in about something completely different, and then said, hey, is there any research opportunity I can do? There you go.
Why, yes, there is.
I'm
Glad you asked. All right, so if you take nothing away from today's presentation, which would make me very, very sad, but I created one single, very simple graphic When we think about what students are looking for today, think about these 3 different concentric circles. Number 1, speed to completion. And I love that you're taking out your phone to take a picture of it. It is this simple, right? Speed to completion. How can they get their most efficient pathway to reach their educational and professional goals? How can we actually provide flexibility and make sure that the students can balance all of those competing responsibilities to ensure that they are set up for success? And then, of course, the last point gets down to the dollars and cents of it all. How do we stay affordable and make sure that students see that there is a clear return on the efforts that they're putting forth? So again, take nothing away, take this away. Now, this is the section that I was saying that, you know, I may or may not get to. I'm not going to do it today. We already talked about it a little bit. The push that I'm making consistently is you all are leading grants on campus. You want the services that you're providing to your students to be sustainable long into the future. So you need to make sure that you're using your data to be able to build the case. And that's what this whole section talks about. But it's also pretty self-explanatory. When I send these slides and follow-up, it's going to make sense to you. So we're going to go ahead and skip. Of course, there'd be animations. Pueblo example. And then this is sort of the wrapping things up. You know, one of the things that I want all of us to be thinking about is this quote that was shared with the provost with us. For years, we've been talking about meeting students where they are. Now we're really doing it. The pandemic forced us to stop talking about being a student-centered institution and start actually being one. Grants are the leading way to doing this work, and so I'm so excited to be able to have this time with all of you. Don't let this be the end of our engagement. This is that slide I was telling you about where you can see the kinds of resources and insights that we offer over on the left-hand side. Don't worry, this will be sent to you and it'll be much clearer when it's on a larger screen. Over on the left-hand side, we have a daily communication that we send out to partners. We have a community college blog where probably about once a month we push out some kind of research practices, something that lets you see how this is being applied in the community college sector. We have studies, white papers, webinars called out over here on the lower left-hand side, different diagnostics and toolkits and things that if you're trying to actually do a thing, many times we have resources that will help take you through that process. But maybe the most important piece is the lower right-hand corner, where it provides you step-by-step instructions on how to access our website so that you can get all of this. Again, if you have any trouble trying to get your access to this or finding a resource or something like that, you can always reach out to Kavivi and Joseph, those folks that I showed you on one of the first couple of slides. But with that, I think we have almost 20 whole minutes for Q&A. So like I said before, it doesn't have to be related to the research that I was sharing with you here. It can be a problem that you're taking on right now. It could be something totally different. Let me know if you have any questions. Pressure is on. I was going to say, Steve turned around. Somebody is going to raise their hand. Thank you.
So I love data. I love filterable data, so we can really tailor it. Are there dashboards? I haven't been on EAB yet. Betsy, I just said to Betsy, when you're onboarded here, they don't tell you that you have access to these things, which is a shame because I would have been on there already, but I will as soon as I go back to the office. And are there dashboards to filter data?
So 2 things. First, before I came to EAB, I was at Nova. I'd been there for years. Nova had a partnership with EAB. I had no idea. So, you know, those of you that are like, I didn't know that we could access this. I didn't either when I was in your seats. So luckily, this is the first step in that direction. The second point, no, the data we provide on there is not something where it's not like Tableau, you know, cutting the data in different ways. You'd want to use things like National Student Clearinghouse and some of the other resources like that in order to do that. It's more, the way I look at our research, it's best practice research. So who's doing what and how could you take that same strategy and deploy it at your institution?
In fact, we just brought it up last week. We're talking about something, some issue we want to expand on. I said, we looked at the let's look at the
That's all, and the folks at Pueblo, you know, as I mentioned before, that's one of the things that the Dean of Students has told me over and over. He's like, you know, whenever we're facing some kind of a challenge, the first question I ask is, how can EAB help me solve this? And if he's not sure, he'll reach out to us and we'll let him know if we have something, and if we don't, then at least give him, questions.
Christina, one of the reasons that we formed the grants coordinating committee is that obviously we want to have more interaction across the grants, give project leaders opportunities to find out what's going on in their projects, what's working. But we also want to heighten visibility of some of the wonderful work and the great innovations that are happening across the grants to the larger campus community. So it's definitely a part of the mission of this group. But in terms of showcasing best practices on campus, are there things that you've seen, like in your travels to community colleges, those colleges that really seem to be doing that well, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think that there's a good opportunity to use things like convocation, or when the faculty come back after winter break, use those large-scale events, because what I can tell you is that it's rare that people will necessarily engage just to hear the cool things that are happening at the campus. It's better to kind of double down on an event that they're already going to be visiting, and then actually showcase it there. So I think about even within EAB. EAB is a pretty large company. One of the things that we do is that when we see something interesting happening in one part of our firm, that actually gets brought to our town hall, where there's maybe 5 or 10 minutes in our virtual town hall meeting where it's just profiling something cool that happened somewhere within the company. So really trying to leverage those opportunities whenever possible. Now, when we're talking about actually trying to scale some of the practices, I think that using things like lunch and learns, professional development opportunities, I think those can also be a really promising avenue. Of course. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one issue that I see a lot, especially, so there was a statement in our grant that states that even though we have all these academic resources for our students do not use them. Mm-hmm. And something that I'm looking to, I really want to try to improve or increase the use of our resources here on campus. So like I said before, so our grant, we have embedded supplemental instructors into high daily rate courses. We came up with this specialized peer tutor where we embed a student who has taken a course and passed with either a B+ grader to help students focus on any high stakes assignments that students tend to fail. But still, even with these resources being embedded into the classroom, the students, unless there is a high buy-in from the professor, students just do not take advantage of these resources. Yeah. So is there any data that you have on the use of resources, how to improve the use of resources? Because that's something that I think I really want to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. So to the point that you were making before, it's a multi-pronged approach that is so critical to it, right? So it's not going to be just your office that does it. You have to engage faculty. One of the pushes that I typically will make is that a lot of the time students don't realize that they're struggling until it's too late. And so number one, they already feel like they're drowning, so they're not really going out, and getting support. Not the right answer, not the right approach, but we know that that's what happens for a lot of students. So on the faculty side of the house, I would say that we want to make sure that we're doing early, low-stakes assessments in every single course, especially any classes that students are going to be taking in their first term on campus. This has never been more important than it is right now because of all the data that I was sharing before about how students don't realize that they are not as academically prepared as their peers were a few years ago. So faculty, early, low-stakes assessments, every single course that a freshman might be taking, a first year, however you call it here at Passaic, we want to make sure that that is number one, no holds barred. You will get pushback from faculty on that. Oh, well, it's not fair. It's not fair to be assessing them so early in the term. It's low stakes. It's just so that we have a sense of whether the student needs support. And then when you do, then you need to make sure that there's some kind of an early alert process or a connection to the resources that are necessary. And then the other piece of it too is that we need to kind of take away the stigma of getting connected to these academic supports. And so what can we do to normalize? It's the same kind of thing that we used to talk about with food pantries. We can't have it tucked away in a corner where nobody can see it. The whole idea is to make it part of the campus community. This is just what you do. So is there an opportunity to make sure that it's in a central location where students are going to be hanging out anyway? So why not go engage with the tutoring office and build some of those connections in those ways? So those are some of the like immediate thoughts that I think, number one, helping to change the culture. Number two, making sure that we're engaging faculty to do early low stakes assessments and then asking them to flag the students that need to be connected to additional resources. And then, number three, just making it accessible for students in person and online. So again, making sure we have those same resources available. If the student doesn't feel comfortable going in person, could we do something online?
Yeah, and I know stigma is such, right, can't get away from it. And just the word tutoring alone is, right, it's like, oh no, and then, I don't want my friends to think that I'm dumb or that I need help. I did hear that University of Boston has changed all tutoring language to academic coaching, and I think that's something that I would love to do here.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good, we're doing it with so many other things, we see this trend in so many other things that used to have a negative connotation. I was actually talking to a school recently, I've forgotten what it is that they called it, but they changed academic probation to make it, again, something that didn't sound so punitive, something that didn't sound so negative, so that students could see that they have a pathway forward. So we're seeing that kind of thing happen a lot. Of course. Other questions?
Yeah, you just made us feel good because we just started a lab that's coming, and it's primarily for education students or any students to come in, but we didn't want to make it a tutoring lab. We're going to make it very informal with students who come in, and then if they want to work on their praxis or they want to work on anything that, the whole lab is set up that way so that they can. But it's very informal, and it's, we try to design the furniture so that it's comfortable and so
it's so tricky, right? Because you want to be kind of showcasing this is about connecting with your peers, and it's actually about relationships. And we know that relationships are going to set you up for success. And by the way, there might be some tutoring support there. But how do we actually cross that bridge so that that doesn't feel like the only thing the student hears?
you need young folks.
At one of my previous institutions, we went into the study groups thing. If you're interested in forming a study group, go to this room, because study group connotates,
That's
a
true.
group of us and
Yeah.
a connection. So
I love that. That's
supplemental instruction. The SIs, it's all about that. It's really reinforcing the content or doing it especially.
Study group doesn't feel as, as I need help. Yeah. All right, any last questions? All right, well then with that, I want to thank you all so much for your engagement, your attention, your participation. This really did make this.